Well, Jack, this was an important week for me in terms of my outlook on Survivor. Welcome to Survivor Analytics. I'm the true expert, Clyde. With me, as always, is the voice of the people, Jack. But I'm going to hop right into it. This was important because it taught me that Survivor at its core is not a social or strategic game. It's a cash grab. CBS and Jeff Probst's goal here is to not create this balanced game with a regular airing schedule. They want to maximize profits as much as possible, and they do it two ways this week. Way number one is that they throw advantages into the game to create flashy moments at Tribal Council, which we see with the Rachel idol play and vote steal. And way number two is that they draw out the content as much as possible. Why are we running a two-part, 2-hour finale? Like, I love Survivor, but this is too much. And I think the way they formatted this is really weird. Like, what was your outlook on the two-parter?
Especially when we go back and watch older seasons where A, the challenges are better, and I'm a broken record for saying that again, but B, the episodes are short, right? A 45-minute episode without commercials. That's a perfect, bite-size, enjoyable. It forces everything that makes it to the edit to have value, right? It's like a short story or a novella where every sentence has to be perfect because there's a limited page count, right? Where then you get these longer seasons, the 90-minute episodes, and then this bloated 4-hour split finale thing. And it's like a novel where the writer and editors were like, well, screw it. We need a page count. We want this to be an 800-page book. You can have some clunky scenes and sentences and draw things out. And, we need to fill time. Let's add some more gimmicks, right? Let's add a side plot we didn't need to add artificially. And the length I already take issue with. The content, I think you texted me this. It's hard to believe that the season was planned to be aired like this because it is impossible to see a finale go any way other than Rachel.
Yes,
at this point.
It's ridiculous now. Yeah.
I mean, the remaining cast at the final four is Rachel, Teeny, Sue, and Sam. Unless there's been some really dramatic jury work, some really dramatic splits. That's the only way I can see this being even a close vote. But that would be undeserved and symbolic, and Rachel deserves this season after this episode. And given who she's up against, you can argue, we will argue today probably, whether or not she deserves to be there. Given who she's next to, she's the clear winner. So I don't know what they're going to give us for 2 hours next week.
It's really strange because I feel like this week clearly outlines who will win next week depending on who sits in the final tribal.
Yeah.
We get a segment of Genevieve and Rachel where they say, hey, if one of us sits in the end, we're going to win.
Yeah.
They also say, what if we both don't make it? Oh, Sam will probably win. So I don't think the edit included that for no reason. It feels like going into next episode, we know there are two outcomes. Either Rachel sits in the end and she wins, or she loses fire and Sam wins the season. I think if they wanted to stretch this out and do the 2-part, 2 hours each finale, which is just ridiculous to begin with, they could have done just the final 6 this week, and then next week run final 5, final 4, final tribal. Because that Andy vote at final 6 has some drama surrounding it. I guess you could draw that out, but the outcome of this season feels like so solidified going into next week's episode that I'm not really that excited for it. Like, I'm going in and actively rooting against Rachel just because I feel like she has a 95% chance of winning, and I think that other final tribal of Sam, Sue, and Teeny would at least create some chaos in the end game. So that's kind of my outlook on the structure of this. I'm not really happy with the way that production is running this, but did you have any other surface level thoughts before we jump into the episode? This is episode, 13 of the season?
I believe so. Episode 13. This was the best episode we're going to get from the end of the season. Either Rachel wins next week and some of us go, oh, well deserved. And some of us go, Or there's a chaos outcome and Sam wins, right? Sam's played a good game in some ways. This finale will not make 47 a high-ranking season of Survivor, right? It won't make this a legendary season.
Yeah, it'll either keep it at its current level or cause it to decline.
Yes, Operation Italy felt like the peak of the season. But so let's get into the aftermath of it.
Coming off of Operation Italy, Final 7 vote where Caroline goes home, the players go back to camp. And my initial concern was that there would be some kind of Andy fallout where people would identify Andy as the head person for that move and immediately start to target him. And in reality, the opposite happens. And through that move, the Operation Italy alliance of Andy, Sam, and Genevieve are able to flip Teeny onto their side. I think a lot of people are going to make fun of Andy this week. We'll talk about his conversation with Rachel later on. But I don't think the fact that he goes out at Final 6 means that the Operation Italy move was the wrong decision, because it actually gives him the majority going into the following round.
Yeah.
And the entire conversation between Teeny and that alliance is absurd. It's a clear instance of Teeny getting manipulated by other players. They convinced them that the entire move last week was a result of circumstances and luck. It's a pretty rough look for Teeny. How did you feel about it since Teeny's on your team?
I mean, there's been this persistent theme with Teeny of they don't know what's going on around them, right? Of they're being caught off guard. We get a montage this week with Teeny sort of finally putting the pieces together that maybe Genevieve hasn't been perfectly honest with her all season. Teeny is a super fan who decides to wear their heart on their sleeve, to trust pretty blindly, to do all of this stuff. And for some reason, they don't learn the lesson of maybe you shouldn't trust what you hear. That doesn't come through. And I was on our Blue Sky account at Survivor Analytics at Blue Sky. And which, by the way, already triple our Threads account.
No way. Hey, well, at least Blue Sky will stick around. TikTok seems to be getting closer and closer to this ban at this point, but I interrupted.
The feminist writer Roxanne Gay posted something. She's a Survivor fan. By the way, Ms. Gay, if you'd ever like to come on the show, we'd love to have you. And basically said, I should try and find it actually, said something about why is Teeny still doing this? It's hard to watch. Well, here, I'll just tell you because I have it right here. Roxanne Gay, maybe Pulitzer winning, very, very successful feminist author. How has Teeny made it this far this season on Survivor? It's baffling. Bless your hearts. I know she's easy to beat, but in the pantheon of Survivor, as charming as she is, she's also the most hapless. It's wild. This idea that a super fan, somebody who loves the show, recognizes Aisha?
Yeah.
From being on a Survivor podcast, right? These Survivor podcaster, they're a dime a dozen. There's way too many Survivor podcasts. There should just be us. If you have that level of fandom, not being willing to distrust, insisting on wearing your heart on your sleeve, it's just a bad look. And Teeny redeems themselves a little bit this week at the reward, just in terms of kind of fan favorite.
Oh, yeah, based
levels.
on vibes. Yeah, with the wine.
After missing out on the reward last week and then flipping right here, I love Teeny. I love that my team is still going in fantasy, but as a player, as a strategic player, absolutely tough to see.
And I think Teeny also mismanages their perception both within the remaining players as well as the jury.
Yeah.
Like within the cast, we see at Tribal Council later this episode, Sam says something along the lines of, I wanted information to leak, so I told Teeny because I know Teeny's going to leak it.
Yes.
It seems like no one really trusts Teeny to keep their secrets, so they're kind of using Teeny more so as a pawn in their plans.
Yeah.
So they're not trusted within the cast. But even if you look to the jury, I feel that Teeny has some pretty rough tribal councils where they walk in and they are pretty open in the fact that I didn't know what was going on last week. Once again, I'm out of the plan. Even if that might be true, Why are you admitting that to the jury? I guess you're showing an element of self awareness, but if you keep hammering that point over and over again, you're only declining in your jury odds.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely terrible jury management. The quote from Sam is, "If you want information to get out there, tell Teeny. It'll get out there." An absolutely masterful move from Sam, I think, to disclose, "Hey," and we'll get into that move from Sam, a while from now, but the perception of Teeny is so bad. It's so unserious in the game, right? Teeny and Sue both, it is impossible to see any win equity.
Sue, I could see a world. I don't think we're going to go through all the final tribal scenarios at the end because Rachel wins all of them, but I will want to discuss the single non Rachel final tribal council because I think that's the most interesting one. But the takeaway from that entire teeny conversation is that Rachel is the consensus target. She was the initial target at 7. If she doesn't have immunity there, she's the one that the Operation Italy Alliance goes after, and she's again the target at final 6. Rachel learns this information by eavesdropping on this conversation. And people will probably say after the season that Rachel is the strategic mastermind because she was eavesdropping and scheming behind the scenes. I don't know if I fully buy into that because the rest of the players straight up tell Rachel after that conversation that she is the target of the vote. Like it's public knowledge around camp. No one tries to keep it a secret from her.
I want to give Rachel a lot of credit for the very exciting stealth move
Oh, it's entertaining for sure. Yeah.
because it's entertaining. It's good, aggressive play from her, right? That's high stakes. Things like blatant eavesdropping, things like going through someone's bag, which we see a couple times this week, those are rare these days. And so I liked that move from Rachel. And then, yes, it does turn out everybody's pretty upfront with her. Hey, we're targeting you. But if they hadn't been, right, if they had gone a different direction, she would still know. So I don't think the fact that that move was later made redundant should discount that move.
Last thing I'd throw out before the immunity challenge is that Rachel catches Sue searching for an idol in the morning. And
Yes.
she doesn't want Sue scrambling. And she elects to tell Sue that, hey, I have an idol. You don't need to worry about this. This fully gains Sue's trust. And I don't want to hate on Sue because she's in a pretty rough spot, similar to Teeny, with very little win equity. But I just don't understand her approach to the game. Like, yes, she has been safe for a large section of this season, but I feel like her strategy has boiled down to I'm going to hide behind a strategically dominant figure and allow them to make all the decisions. And sometimes that works. Like we saw that work for Natalie in Samoa. But I think that only works if you're hiding behind someone who is hated by the rest of the cast. Sue does this at multiple points. For the pre-merge, she's hiding behind Gabe, working as one of his wounded birds. When Gabe gets voted out, she becomes completely loyal to Caroline, and Caroline is perceived as the dominant figure of that duo. And now that Caroline's gone, she's pivoting to Rachel. So I feel like she hasn't selected the correct person to tag alongside in any stage of the game.
And there's this dynamic that we see with Caroline, right? Where Caroline's constantly thinking of moves and wanting to be a part of moves. And there's sort of this, oh, we'll get him next time. We weren't a part of this one. It's okay. We've got time. And then time just runs out. Sue has made it very, very far in the game. Sue has survived. I could see Sue next week pushing, oh, I helped get Kyle out. I said we need to target Kyle. Yeah, Kyle won every challenge ever because he's a meat boy. Everyone knew we had to challenge or target Kyle. So that's not a novel insight. That was not a contribution from you that really changed the game. And I think there's a little bit of a delusion to her that isn't helped by the dirt on her face.
Do you want to go to immunity?
Yeah, it's an obstacle course that ends in a puzzle, but it's on the ocean. They have to swim. Ooh, and it is very clear the stakes. If Rachel wins this, her path to 4 is done, right? If she wins this immunity, she's good to go. Genevieve is also very determined to win this because she is in a similar position of if she wins this, it will really carry her a long, long, long way. But so, challenge comes down to the wire, and Genevieve wins. Rachel cannot bring it home, and There's also a reward. Genevieve wins the challenge and gets to take two people, takes Teeny and Sue on the reward. The reward is steak, because Jeff makes a horrible steak pun, salad, wine, maybe cheesecake, which made me think, by the way, before we talk about the choice of Sue and Teeny, do you think Liz's meltdown around the Applebee's reward ended that sponsorship deal, or do you think we'll see that again in a couple years?
I think Liz's meltdown probably helped the sponsorship. People remembered that Applebee's segment because Liz reacted so poorly. But with these selections, Genevieve originally intends on picking Sam, and he's shaking his head saying no. Sam tweeted after the show, not on Threads, not on Blue Sky.
He's on Blue Sky, though.
Oh, so maybe he said the same thing there. He claimed that he was vomiting and having stomach issues both before and after this challenge. So
Jeez.
in the moment, he said something along the lines of like, don't use it on me. Like the food will go to waste if you select me. So I thought it was interesting that they cut out that entire segment of Sam battling the elements this late in the season. And it leads me to believe that Sam is probably not winning, because if he was, they would probably highlight that underdog element to his story of not only has he overcome the numbers disadvantage in the post merge, but he's overcoming these physical ailments as well. Those are the only things I had from the challenge. I don't care that much about the challenge in
No,
general.
the other challenge is way better, but we'll get there.
The only other thing I'll say about this challenge, and this is my Andy fandom coming forward.
Andom.
Yeah, my Andom. The result of this challenge is the worst case scenario for Andy. If Sam wins individual immunity, you get the idol play and Genevieve goes home, and the same thing happens if Sue or Teeny wins it. Rachel, I'm not sure what happens in that scenario, but it feels like the one person that Andy could not afford to win immunity ends up winning it here.
Yeah, I think that's true. I find it very interesting. Andy's a very fit dude. We don't see a lot of challenge success from him, though. I mean, there are a few players on this cast who they're social players, right? That is not their priority. Andy's like a pretty buff guy, and we don't see. I wonder if it's strategic, if he's not trying to win challenges.
I think he's trying to win them. It's just that there haven't been a lot of challenges that play to that particular strength. The only one that I could think of is the one where he's holding the bucket, and he lost that to Kyle. I think he got second place there. So Andy was probably hoping for more endurance, strength-based challenges in the late game, and you got more puzzle-based ones, which play to Genevieve and Rachel's strengths instead, which is part of the reason why I'm lower on challenge wins in the greater scheme of Survivor, because there is an element of luck there. Like, what type of challenges thrown your way? Is it something that plays to your physical strengths or not? You want to head to Sanctuary where good things happen?
Let's head to Sanctuary where good things happen. Teeny immediately pops open the bottle of wine and starts pouring. And God bless them. Teeny, this is their best moment of the back half of the season by far. Absolutely unhinged, chaotic, starts drinking immediately before any food is past their lips, promptly tells Sue about Genevieve's idol, air quotes. We know it's a fake idol. Teeny, of course, does not know it's a fake idol, but absolutely spectacular move from Teeny. Really, really great.
It's another instance of Teeny inadvertently boosting Genevieve's game. You mentioned that montage that we get later in the episode, but I feel like Teeny is the perpetual punching bag for Genevieve on this season, where whenever Genevieve makes a good move, it always comes at Teeny's expense. I'll also note, this is a fun Teeny fact I wrote down. After this episode, Teeny has not voted correctly in a tribal council since the Kyle boot at the final 8. They've been on the outs every single vote since then.
That's really tough.
But that's the only main highlight that I had from the Sanctuary's Teeny's drinking. It does worry me a little bit in that I think Teeny's kind of presented as a sloppy player, and I like it when contestants get drunk on reward, and I'm worried that future players will see this and they'll take the Carson approach and just get juice at the Sanctuary.
I hope that is people's strategy and they have the temptation, right? They go, ooh, I could be sober, or, you know what? It's been a stressful few days. Maybe I just pop a little bottle here. But yeah, that's a good point. Meanwhile, back at camp, I have to bring up a conversation. And we've been a pretty pro Andy podcast for the last couple of weeks, on average, I would say.
We?
I've given him his flowers for Operation Italy, right?
Okay, okay.
But Andy decides after this challenge that he knows the outcome of the game. And he starts jury managing Rachel very early. They are sitting in the hammocks. He starts saying, "Hey, let me tell you how great of a game I've been playing that you don't recognize." Because Rachel pretty brutally says to him, "Yeah, your greatest," she says something like, "Your greatest strength is that you don't care, that you're kind of carefree going through life."
Yeah, she says that the jury will perceive his game as a nothing burger.
Yes.
And Andy actually reveals after the season in his exit interviews that Rachel told him that if she were voted out, she wouldn't be too high on Andy's game going into the jury, which
Yeah.
is pretty scary for Andy since it seems like Rachel is a player that the jury respects. They're cheering her along in multiple tribal councils. So I think Andy feels that I need to have Rachel on my side if she were to get voted out, if I want to have a chance at winning this thing. Because as much as I love Andy, I will admit that his jury prospects on this season are not great. Like, I think he would lose to Rachel in the end. I think he would lose to Genevieve in the end. Sam, it's close. Personally, I would vote for Andy over Sam, but I don't know how the rest of the jury would feel between those two prospects. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of people will look at this move as, oh, Andy's in power and now he's getting cocky and sharing his resume too early. And there is some logic there that maybe you should wait until the final tribal to share all your secrets. But I also think that there is something to be said about making a move too late in the game. And
Mhm.
if Andy tries to make a complete 180 on the jury's perception in the final tribal, he might be unsuccessful. Like, he needs a couple people on that jury that are going to be campaigning for him until that night right before the vote itself. I don't think this was a move made out of hubris on Andy's end. I think he's doing his best with the information that he has available. It ends up backfiring on him as we see, but I don't think that this move drastically declines my opinion of Andy as a player.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it ruins his resume, but I do think it's a pretty bad read. And Andy is not a player who has succeeded in the past with reading a room very well. From the very beginning with Rachel, right? He wanted to be allies and get up at dawn and make strategy on day 2. I see an Andy return in the future. And if Andy's listening, this is the thing I think he needs to work on in his game, which is timing and reading the room, because he makes one of the best moves of the new era, in my opinion, last week. That's undeniably great. The tone and the way he approaches this conversation with Rachel, um, Rachel says coming out of that conversation that didn't do anything to raise her opinion of Andy's game as like a jury member. All it did was make him her target.
Well, I think those two things go hand in hand. She sees him as a bigger threat in the long run, and as a result, she wants to take him out. I think that conversation was the realization for Rachel that, wait, Andy actually could win this. Maybe he does beat me in a jury vote.
Right.
And I think Rachel's making the wrong move in targeting Andy. I think the
Mm.
right move here is for her to vote out Sam because I think Rachel beats both Sam and Andy in a final tribal. The only
Really?
person she has a tough time with is probably Genevieve. So I think Rachel's goal at this point in the season should not be voting out the players with the best resumes that are below her. It should be finding a path to the final tribal because
Mm.
now it seems like that path is really narrow. It basically relies on winning out, winning every last immunity challenge or winning fire. So if I'm Rachel, I would sit back and think, okay, I need to take out the physical competitors at this stage of the game. And if you're comparing Andy and Sam, I don't think it's really that close. I think Sam is the way better challenge competitor than Andy. So I think she makes the wrong move here and ultimately flipping on Andy over Sam.
Interesting. That's all I have until tribal. So what else you got?
The only other thing I'll throw out with that Andy conversation is that there's a lot of comparisons between Andy and Emily Flippin from Survivor 45. They
Mm-hmm.
are both the underdogs of their respective seasons, people that had a very rough premiere, struggled to connect with their initial tribe, but built up agency over the course of the post merge. And it's interesting because Andy and Emily make the same exact mistake in their elimination round. In 45, Emily leads the charge against Bruce at the final 8. Bruce held
Right.
an idol. Emily convinces him not to play it. And when she goes back to camp, she tells the rest of the tribe, hey, that was my move. I'm the one that tricked Bruce. And
Yeah.
by taking credit, she peaks her threat level and they vote her out. Andy kind of does the same thing here.
Yeah.
So I think it would be really interesting if we could see Andy and Emily on the same season. I know that
Ooh.
Emily has said in the past that she doesn't want to return to Survivor, but I think they could be a very fun duo to run the game.
I mean, I would love to see that. I think that's a great point. What an interesting parallel. Like the question of when to claim a move. Emily's move was more, her timing with that was more justifiable. That was a more individual move. Operation Italy has 2 witnesses. And so if Andy decided to reveal that at Final Tribal, odds are good what at least one of those people is on the jury and has nothing to lose by verifying his claim. But yeah, that's a really interesting point, though. I had not made that connection. That's really cool.
I've seen them as similar players for a large stretch of the season. I think Andy's better strategically. And I think the difference between him and Emily there as well is that Emily gives up that information willingly immediately after tribal council. She does it in the night footage in that episode. Whereas Andy only gives up that information when he feels like he's losing a potential jury vote. So
Right.
I think his reasoning is a bit more justified than Emily's, but it's a mistake either way. Want to go to tribal council? This is painful
Yeah,
for
let's go
me.
to tribal council. Rachel, masterful tribal council, I will say. I think there are pieces of Rachel's game that it is hard to give her credit for. That is a valid criticism, all of the issues with her idols and advantages and all of that. But I loved this tribal for Rachel. She calls out Andy's flip after a couple of other people were very wishy-washy and diplomatic in their answers. There was a lot of new era, things move, people make decisions, conversations are had, and sometimes you're not there, right? And Rachel goes, well, let's just put it on the table. It was Andy. And Andy tries to deflect in what I would say is another sort of poor social move from him. He tries to do the diplomatic, well, I had conversations and choices were made. And Jeff, I think, forces the, hey, Rachel just made it simple, yes or no. And he says, yes, I flipped. Absolutely fantastic from Rachel.
Well, what's the reasoning for that move? Like, why is Rachel calling out Andy right before the vote?
Because I think she's trying to characterize the move of Operation Italy as Andy's move, not Sam or Genevieve's. Make it clear Andy was the decision maker, Andy was the tipping point, and then she takes him out.
Okay. So I agree with you. And I think that's great from a jury perspective. Like Rachel's winning chances went up through that move. But at the same time, it's also terrible from a threat level management perspective, where Rachel already knows I'm the target. They're already gunning for me. Why not just make my threat level even bigger going into the final 5?
I love it. It's so bold.
It is really bold, but there's a difference between bold gameplay and tactical gameplay.
Yeah.
And Rachel knows going into the final 5, I'm not going to have this idol anymore. I'm going to be putting all my chips on the table, relying on that last challenge. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It shows some game ability there, but there's also a concern for me where you're intentionally painting a target on yourself when there's already one there. And maybe she feels like, hey, I'm going to be the target no matter what. Who cares if
Mhm.
I make it even bigger? She has that quote about the funeral. Did you write that one down?
I'm afraid I did not, but she describes it as being at her own funeral, essentially.
I wrote down something. It doesn't feel like the right quote. I think the only thing better than attending your own funeral is waking up, realizing that you're still alive the next morning.
Yeah. So that's something like that.
It was something along those lines. A nice comparison there. She plays the idol. Major shout out to the production intern that put the idol clue in her French fries. And Andy goes home. It's a 4-2 jury vote where All 4 votes against Rachel are negated. The 2 against Andy come from Sue and Rachel. As Andy heads out the door, I like what Rachel tells him. She says, "You were very convincing today, just not the way you thought."
Mhm.
So it does give me a little bit more confidence in Andy had he reached the end. How did you feel about the loss of Andy, our shining light?
Well, I mean, I was sad to see him go, honestly, because I thought Andy's win equity, if he had played the reveal of Operation Italy differently, his win equity could have been pretty big and made for a more interesting final, right? I find it very interesting when people sit next to each other at the end who worked on a plan together and arguing over who deserves the credit. I always enjoy. And so I would have liked to see an Andy Sam or Andy Genevieve final tribal because of that. But, I think given his decision to jury manage prematurely led to this, right? I think Sam would have gone home otherwise.
And you said you feel that Andy's going to come back for 50.
I think he'll definitely come back. I don't know when it will be. Do you think it'll be 50?
I think he's the biggest lock on this cast in terms of returning chances. How do
Hmm.
you think he would perform on 50? Do you think this is Andy's ceiling that we just watched, or do you think he has more to prove on a second appearance?
Oh, I think he's got more to prove. I think he's got more to do. Andy strikes me as the kind of guy who learns a lesson, right? His comeback on the season is so commendable. His recovery from delusion and meltdown is so great. That's him showing the ability to improve on the fly and course correct. And I see Andy as a guy who is sitting at home watching this season, seeing how he can play better in the future. And I think he will. So I don't think this is his ceiling at all.
I agree. When Andy comes back for Survivor 50, I will do everything in my power to draft him on my fantasy team. I thought he was going to win this season before it started, and I'll feel the same way about 50. I think he has a great mixture of perceived threat going into the season as well as game ability. Because you'll have some players that could potentially return for 50. People like D from 45 or
Mhm.
Charlie from 46. People who I think are better holistic players than Andy, but they are also respected by the general Survivor community. They will
Mhm.
walk into that season with a larger target on their back. I think
Yeah.
if you look at the ratio of Andy's game ability and his target, he's one of the best potential contestants on a return.
Yeah. That's a great point.
I have a epitaph for Andy,
Hey, mate.
as well as a little monologue for him because, he's my guy.
Yeah, he's your guy.
R.I.P. Andy, the man of many names. He's the smiling assassin, the spider building the webs of alliances, the underdog, the mafia boss of Operation Italy, the first overall draft pick. You can call Andy whatever you want. All I know is he's all that, which is another callback. I'll give a little spiel on Andy here and his gameplay.
Yeah.
I'll be making my end of season power rankings starting next week once all this is wrapped up. And Andy has a serious argument for the number 1 spot. When I look at his resume, I think he is someone that's in the majority alliance in every single tribal council that he attends, including the tribal where he goes home. On top of that, he has 2 clear stamps on his resume. He's the first domino to fall in the Sierra boot at Final 11. He pulls off Operation Italy at Final 7.
Uh-huh.
And he gathers the numbers against Rachel at Final 6. And had someone else bid on the fries at the Survivor auction, Rachel goes home here, and Andy goes into the final 5 in a very strong position with the opportunity to potentially go to the end with Sue and Tini. So I'm devastated, but I feel good about the game that he played on this season. I feel justified taking him first overall.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Andy has charmed you just like he charmed the editing bay. But at the same time, he did play a hell of a game. He really, really did. And I cannot and will not take that away from him. I think he ended up being one of the best players on this cast, and definitely one of the most entertaining.
With that said, I do have a ranking of my top 10 new era players,
Uh-huh.
and that's in the works. I've released it, but I always update it after every new era season. And 47 might be the first new era season where none of the contestants make it into the top 10 of that list. To give you a little bit of perspective, I have Kenzie at number 9. And I don't know if I could put anyone on this cast ahead of Kenzie.
I don't think I would put anyone on this cast ahead of Kenzie.
Maybe that'll change in the finale and I'll have, a revelation of some kind. But as it stands right now, I feel like we're looking at the worst cast of the new era from a strategic perspective. But hey, Andy might be the best of the worst, which is still pretty cool in my book.
Yeah. I mean, I think this has been a very strategically straightforward forward season, with the exception of Operation Italy.
So we can go to the next morning. Rachel is clearly the consensus target. Sam and Genevieve are searching her bag. There's a camp-wide idol hunt where we see Genevieve following Rachel. And I don't know if you remember this, but back in the pre-merge, we saw Rome following Saul around camp during an idol hunt.
Yep.
And during that stretch, Genevieve was invisible. We saw nothing from her in those first 3 episodes.
Yeah.
But if you fast forward 2 months, it looks like Genevieve was taking notes out of the Rome playbook, and she's now doing the exact same thing.
We have to talk about the Rachel Genevieve dynamic in this half of the episode, because it is this fantastic, very open acknowledgement of, we are gunning for each other. We both recognize that the other is one of the strongest players left in this game. But you know what? We don't have to be mean to each other. We don't have to be rude. It's the best of the new era and of Survivor, I think. And I really appreciated the sportsman-like, friendly, hey, look at us, 2 young women, powerful young women dominating the game. Isn't this great? Sure, we're mortal enemies right now, but we'd hang out after this. It's a great vibe.
It's a great vibe for them. It pisses off the other 3 players who are back at camp and realizing Rachel and Genevieve are definitely hyping each other up right now, claiming that they are the ones that are capable of winning the game. So that's like the one glimmer of hope for me, that this other group of 3 could band together at Final Four to take out Rachel. But this is the segment of the episode where I feel like the show is presenting its cards, as Genevieve and Rachel straight up say, hey, if we don't win, Sam will probably win. So maybe that's a red herring of some sort, but I just thought it was really weird for the show to include that, given the split across these 2 episodes.
We passed something about these 2 that I want to talk about, because I think you're right about that sort of foreshadowing. When they return to camp after Rachel has played her idol, everyone's like, Rachel, you got to tell us how you got your idol. And Rachel, in an excellent move, says, I'll tell if Genevieve tells how she got her idol. And says, okay, my story will come out as long as both stories come out. An absolutely fantastic way to potentially expose a fake idol. Really, really great. And immediately in Genevieve's story, things start to not add up. Teeny, in the moment, in their impulsive, incapable of not saying things way, goes, there was no piece of paper under the pizza. The doubt is instantly cast on Genevieve's idol there. And it's a very subtle moment from Rachel that works out really, really well.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of suspicion around Genevieve's idol for this entire round.
Yeah.
Going into the immunity challenge, I want to get your take on this. I feel like there's these 2 titans in the game of Genevieve and Rachel, where if Genevieve wins immunity, Rachel's probably going home. If Rachel wins immunity, Genevieve will go out. What do you think happens if one of those other players wins immunity? If it's a Teeny or a Sam or a Sue? Because I think it's Rachel that goes out if anyone else wins it other than Rachel herself.
I think if Sam wins, there's an interesting argument that it might be Genevieve. If he wants to be the only one who can claim the moves they shared. Even then, I think it is still Rachel, because the consensus at camp is it's Rachel. And if it's not Rachel, it's Genevieve. And if it's not Genevieve, I guess it's Sam, right? That's the through line.
Yeah, the only asterisk with that scenario, and I feel like we were kind of robbed of this. Like, I think Rachel winning the immunity challenge is the least entertaining option on the table.
Yep.
Because if Genevieve won, then you have the question of, would Sue be willing to play her idol on Rachel and save her in that tribal council? And I think that's a very interesting situation that we never got to see play out based on the result of the challenge.
Yeah.
But in that scenario, I don't think Sue would have played the idol on her. as much as Sue loves Rachel, as much as Sue wants to give Rachel the win, I don't think she would have gone that far at this stage. But you want to go to the second immunity challenge of the
Yeah,
episode?
so we're back at immunity, and this is a much better challenge. Sprint in from the beach, dig out some sand, and then the real challenge starts. After you've tired yourselves out. The real challenge is while standing on a quote wobbly board, which is like some sort of Flintstones cartoon construction of a plank on a spring. So it's going wobbling. While standing on that, use a marshmallow roasting stick to stack balls and like stands for the balls 6 high, right? Is it 6 or 7?
I don't know. I zoned out during the challenge.
And this takes a very long time. It is an absolutely brutal challenge. The sprint and the sand digging, right? Exhausting your arms and legs before you then have to balance and be as still as possible while you are trying to do this very delicate stacking exercise. Absolutely great challenge. Really, really interesting, really dynamic. Once again, it comes down to Genevieve and Rachel, right? No one else ever comes really close, but both Genevieve and Rachel have some big falls. It's a close, tense, felt like 9 minutes of the episode. It was a long challenge. And Rachel wins out in the end, and it's very close.
This is Rachel's what? Second or third immunity win of the season?
Third
This is her
immunity win.
third. So I know you were saying not too long ago, you want to see a challenge beast win Survivor, and you might finally get it. Because if Rachel wins next week, she'll have 4 under her belt. Is it as satisfying as you dreamed it would be? After all of these seasons to finally watch someone dominate their way and basically survive through challenge wins?
It's great. It's fantastic. The asterisks on Rachel's record are significant, but when you get things like her crawling in the dark, when you get things like her standing on this beam that is wobbling, and you watch somebody else, you watch Sam or Teeny or Sue, and they're shaking all over the place, and she is stone cold. That's how Dee was in these sorts of balance challenges. There is a skill there that I certainly do not have in these endurance, balance-based challenges. And when you see that, it is there's very few ways that Survivor can really show off a Meat Boy's skill. Obviously, wins reflect it, but actually seeing it visually on screen, it is hard to see somebody's physical dominance. This is where it shows up. That level of core strength and balance and calm is truly remarkable and is the kind of outplaying that I love to see on Survivor, and it makes me very, very happy.
It was an impressive win. I think some people are a little bit, misunderstanding my outlook on Rachel because I've been so low on her the past couple weeks. My stance on Rachel is that if she wins this season, it will be a lower tier win in the greater history of the show. I'm in the process of making my rankings now, and I kind of separate it into tiers. So your absolute bottom tier is players who were saved by twists, who had some kind of gimmick thrown in the game that they never expected that gave them the win.
Yeah.
The tier right above that are players who needed immunity wins in order to make it to the end. Some people see that as impressive. From my perspective, every winner of Survivor, quote unquote, survived and made it to the end and got the jury votes. So the best winners are the ones who win the game, regardless of the outcome of immunity challenges. So I think my outlook on Rachel's win, if she were to win the season, would be in that second to bottom tier.
Yeah.
However, I think Rachel is a better player than her winning game might suggest. I think that ability to win challenges is something that's repeatable and would help her on any given season. So even though I might rank her win as lower tier, that doesn't mean Rachel the player is lower tier. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that the key is that what you said there at the end about repeatability. Rachel could have a good run on any season of Survivor. She has skills that would reproduce very easily for her. There have just been circumstances where the magic question boxes that she punches from Mario Party have perfectly aligned with her needs. It's like when somebody somebody gets an offer to play a sport because they're, Scottie Pippen Jr. gets an offer to join the NBA or get drafted into the G League. But then, wait a minute. Okay, that worked out for him because of circumstances outside his control. But, oh, he can actually play. Maybe Scottie Pippen Jr. isn't the right example, but I feel like he's probably doing better than Bronny. So
Yeah,
I don't know. But yeah, so I think that's very fair. We have this great win from Rachel. And now the question is Genevieve's idol real? If so, Sam is in the clear second spot, right? Sam will be going home. Sam makes a decision out of his own best interest that I think is the absolute right move.
Yeah.
He tells Teeny, Genevieve's idol is fake. I made it with her at Sanctuary where good things happen on the Operation Italy reward. Teeny tells all, just like Sam says later in the episode, and we quoted earlier. And the question becomes, is it true or not? Right? And Rachel, to her discredit in an episode that is otherwise pretty great from her, is absolutely convinced that's a bluff. It's a real idol. Sam is messing with them to get the vote off of himself.
It's a rough read on Rachel's end, but I think that trio ends up making the correct decision. They ultimately decide to split the vote 2-1 between Genevieve and Sam. It's pretty funny because Teeny gets this entire revenge arc of there are so many times that Genevieve has crossed me. She knocked out Keyshawn. She knocked out Saul. She knocked out Caroline. Quick side note, that Keyshawn blindside happened like 2 months ago, and they keep bringing it up in the edit. It's absurd.
Well, I think it's because Genevieve has been so open about everything besides Keyshawn was emotionless for her. And Keyshawn was her big kind of narrative arc. Yeah, we get that whole montage. The question about the Rachel misread, because it's not a good look, but I think it's actually Rachel giving Genevieve too much credit. I don't think it's paranoia from Rachel. I think it's game recognizing game. And Rachel going, well, Genevieve and I both made it to this point. We spent this whole episode hyping each other up. Of course she's got an idol. Like, I'm not going to doubt that from her. I think this is her play. It's a really tough position, right? Is it a bluff? Is it not? Is it a double? It's so easy to spiral and not be able to figure out, not discern the truth there. That's a really, really tough spot. With the split vote, is there anything else here?
Only other thing I'll throw out is that Genevieve tells Teeny the truth and says that, hey, the idol is fake. And
Yeah.
even with that comment, there is still distrust and chaos surrounding the integrity of that idol.
Which I think is another knock on Teeny, because Teeny is told that information, but nobody trusts Teeny as a reliable source because Teeny hasn't known what's going on.
But I don't know, going into Tribal, this felt like the most obvious vote that we've had in a while. And I think that's kind of a common trend in the new era. Like whoever goes out at Final Five is typically this big player that other contestants do not want to see even have the opportunity to compete in fire making. In 46, that was Maria. In 45, it was Julie. Who is it in 44? You're testing my knowledge. I think it's Lauren that goes out at 5, I want to say.
I think you're testing your knowledge, actually. I don't think that. I think you spun yourself into that one.
Yeah. Lauren probably doesn't follow the same trend as the other two, but it definitely applies to Maria and Julie.
I do not remember Lauren at all.
You don't remember Lauren? The disrespect, a member of the Ratu tribe, closely aligned with Brandon. Yeah, I think she had like 2 kids and she had like some flashback segment after winning a challenge on how she made her kids proud. Really wholesome character. I don't think she's coming back though. Moving to Tribal Council.
I mean, it's a pretty straightforward tribal, I thought.
Yeah, pretty straightforward. Sue plays her idol. I am thinking about making a video kind of as a parody video of me saying, is Sue's idol play the best strategic move of the new era? And try to just make a fake case in favor of it. I don't know if I can come up with enough fake points to really go along.
Sue just plays it because it's cool to get to play an idol. It's the last day it works.
I guess I just don't understand what Sue expects with this move.
Sue expected the jury to stand up and give her an ovation. I think Sue expects people to not say anything about the dirt contouring, right? Sue expected every alliance that she stuck with to work out. I think Sue played this idol and looked around going, why isn't everyone cheering and giving me the sole survivor title now?
The ideal outcome for Sue here would be that both Rachel and Genevieve lose immunity, and then she would play the idol on one of them to knock out the other, just to show she has some kind of strategic ability. And then at Final Four, you vote out the other remaining players. So she gets to the end still with Sam and Teeny, but at least that way she can say, I directed the vote at the very end of the season. By just playing it on herself, it's kind of a nothing burger move, in my opinion. But your final vote, 3 on Genevieve, 2 on Sam. The 2 against Sam are Teeny and Genevieve, so it's pretty funny that in Genevieve's exit, Teeny works alongside her. Quick epitaph for Genevieve, RIP Genevieve, the underdog outside the underdog alliance.
Mm.
I think Genevieve played one of the best games on the island. Like Andy, I think Genevieve is someone who's kind of screwed over by the results of twists and challenges. Like without that Rachel idol play at 6, her side takes control of the game, and she has a lot of win equity going into the final 5. Kind of like what I mentioned earlier. If anybody else other than Rachel wins immunity at 5, she probably survives this round, and she has a chance to win fire making and go on to win the season. So
Yep.
definitely a top 3 player on this cast for me. Would you want to see Genevieve come back and play again?
I don't know if Genevieve did enough to really distinguish herself for me to see her as a return player. Like, definitely not a 50 player, right? But maybe at some point for a returning season.
Really, I think I'm higher on Genevieve than you. I get Parvati vibes from Genevieve.
Well, here's where I think the difference is for me is the edit was so fixated on Andy. Genevieve does not get her moment, does not jump out as a character until the last month of the season. There was a moment in the auction where I went, who is that? And I had to wait until the caption said Genevieve when she spoke to go, oh, that's Genevieve. Like, I didn't recognize her. And it's because there was so little in the edit of her. And part of it was probably also that I missed a couple episodes this season. But she was under featured. And I think it was to the point where I was just like, she's a good player, but like, if Andy's the best of the worst, I don't know if Genevieve's play was enough to put her in a returning season going forward. I don't know.
At the same time, though, I think Genevieve still had a storyline on this season. I think her arc was one that was about, I started the game and I cared about people's feelings, and it hurt me when Keyshawn went home. And since then, I've kind of closed off and played a strictly strategic game. I think on a return, Genevieve could walk into the season and say, playing only strategically led me to get 5th place. And I now realize I need to balance both the strategy of Survivor, but also my relationships on the island. So I think there could be something for her on a return. I see Parvati potential with her. Parvati is someone that we just covered on Cook Islands, went out in a very similar placement. Parvati got 6th there while Genevieve got 5th. They were both women that controlled their original tribe, had a lot of agency in the early merge, and ultimately lost control due to advantages or twists in the game. Who knows? Parvati had success on future seasons. I won't say to what degree of success, but Genevieve could hit a similar level down the line. I think she's someone with a lot of game ability. I think the last thing that I want to talk about before winners and losers is the potential Sam, Sue, Teeny final tribal. If
Yes.
Rachel sits in the end, she wins the season. If she sits in the end against Teeny and Sue, she potentially wins in a unanimous jury vote, which would be kind of cool. That's something we have not covered yet on the podcast.
No. Can I just say, thank you, Rachel, for giving me a season where I don't have to fill out Clyde's PDF going through every permutation of tribal council.
Well, don't thank Rachel. Thank Survivor because they ran this 2-part finale with only 4 people going into next week. There's only 4 possible combinations, and 3 of them are Rachel
That's
wins.
a good point. That's very true. Okay, so we're looking at the Sam, Teeny, Sue trio.
Yeah. So I think there's 3 locked votes on the board there. I think
Okay.
Sam guaranteed gets Sierra and Genevieve. Are those safe to say?
Yes.
Sue has Caroline on lock.
You think?
I think so. They were besties on the island. And I think these 3 players, none of them are particularly great strategically. So even though Caroline is a more strategically minded person, when none of the competition is that strong, she might just fall back on who was I closest to, and that will probably be Sue. We also need to keep in mind that if Sue reaches the end, she'll have the big reveal of telling the cast her true age, which could also swing some jury votes in her direction. So I'll give you a name, and you tell me where you think they land. Let's start with the golden boy, Andy. Who does Andy vote for in this scenario?
Sam.
And is that based out of original Gata connection or like Operation Italy vibes?
It's Operation Italy. It's, hey, we had this big move together. It's that move, and it's that Sam has, of those three, Sam does have the best strategic bona fides.
How about Gabe? Would Gabe go Sue based on their alliance in game?
Gabe goes Sam as well, I think.
Okay. So why is that?
Because I think Gabe has been sitting at Ponderosa with Kyle for a while, hearing how Sue hated him, right? And Gabe and Kyle were always closer, I got the sense, than Gabe and Sue, even though Gabe wanted to play with Sue more than he wanted to play with Kyle. And I think that Sam's strategic stuff, I think Operation Italy is doing a lot of the work for Sam, right? Because
Yeah.
he might not have come up with the idea, but he was a part of it and they successfully landed it. And I think that Sam's flip on Genevieve is really big. I think the idol reveal, it's looking like a Sam win to me.
So right now Sam has 4 of the votes. Where do you think Saul goes here? Could Saul go Teeny?
Saul might go Teeny, but I think Saul is too pragmatic. I think Saul his heart says Teeny and his brain says Sam. And I'm not sure which wins out.
I think he leans hard overhead. I feel like
Really?
Saul's big storyline of the season was he voted out Rome after Rome had been bullying him in the pre-merge. And that felt more like a heart-based move of this was someone that was antagonizing me, and I finally got to enact my revenge.
Yeah.
Come on, can we give Saul to Teeny? Let's give Teeny one jury
we'll
vote.
give Saul Teeny.
Then we got Rachel. Now she has the Gata connection with Sam, but she has the post-merge alliance with Sue, where Sue is really the person keeping her afloat and the only person that she could lean on for the last couple rounds.
I think Rachel goes Sam.
And last one is Kyle. I feel like Kyle goes Sam pretty safely. He won't vote for Sue because Sue trashes him. And I don't think there's really anything in the edit to suggest a friendship or a connection between Kyle and Teeny. So your result there is a 6-1 to 1, Sam winning the show. But even with that, I feel like only 2 of Sam's jury votes are absolute locks. I think that group of Andy, Gabe, Rachel, and Kyle could flip depending on how the final tribal plays out. But that's the one that I'm personally rooting for, just because if Rachel reaches the end, we're going to have like 90 minutes of the finale that will be an absolute drag. It'll be just waiting for the final vote and seeing Rachel win, which is cool, but it's not a dynamic endgame by any means.
Yeah, it's hard to look forward to a 2-hour episode with Rachel winning.
We can go to winners and losers then. We have the same winner, right?
Rachel?
Yeah, Rachel winning. It's kind of egregious how obvious the edit is pointing in Rachel's direction, and that's all I wrote down in her front. But she has some good moves. She has the idol play. She has the challenge win. She has the eavesdropping.
I'd love the eavesdropping. I'm such a sucker for it. That was a great move.
And who's your loser?
My loser is Teeny, because as much as I love Teeny, I don't think it's a matter of, oh, is Teeny going home or is Teeny sitting at the tribal? I think the hard part is it doesn't matter. The edit has turned them into kind of the comedic relief a little bit because there's not much else they've been able to do. The best thing we get from them this week is getting wine drunk and leaking Genevieve's idol, right? Which is a pretty great moment. But it's also like, that's not a great reflection on Teeny as a player. And I feel this is Teeny as a loser. As a fan of the show, if I went on the show and then this was the outcome, I would be pretty disappointed in myself. And I have to imagine Teeny is not feeling too great.
It's been not great for Teeny the last couple episodes. It's tough for me too, because I feel like when I'm analyzing players, I'm constantly asking myself the question, what is their optimal move in each round of the game? And it's tough for me to find an optimal move for Teeny because I feel like no matter what they do, they will not have the respect of the jury to win in the end, especially with only one round of gameplay left. But I gave my loser to Sue because I feel like Teeny was kind of dead in the water walking into this week. Sue at least had that idol in her pocket. She had the opportunity to make a big play and impress the jury, and she passed it up. She kind of solidified the jury's perception of her as this passive player going from round to round. So I feel like her stock took the biggest hit. With that said, I would not put Sue at a 0% chance of winning. Like as it stands now, I would say like it's 85% Rachel, 14% Sam, 1% Sue. I could see it happening with Sue, but it'd be absolutely absurd. And I bet next week's podcast would be a lot of fun if Sue ended up winning.
Oh, it would be fiery. It would be 15 minutes long, and it's just me screaming.
Screaming. Okay. Quick dishonorable mention to wine nights. I mentioned this earlier, but I'm worried that other players will not drink on rewards because of Teeny's influence on the game. We saw Carson change Survivor with puzzle preparation, and now Teeny might change Survivor with staying away from alcohol.
My honorable mention is going to go to, there wasn't a great like esoteric historical referencey type thing this week. My honorable mention is going to go to the Jungle of Fiji. I realized this week that I'm at the point with Fiji where I'm recognizing parts of the jungle as they're walking through.
Oh,
And I'm going, oh, I remember that, but not from Rachel standing there. I'm remembering that from Banu standing there. Oh, I'm remembering that shot from when Kenzie was talking about how blue her eyes are when she cries, right? Like, I'm becoming a scholar of this Fijian island's geography. And so I guess my shout out, my honorable mention is to the island of Fiji, which is a positive spin on the unoriginality of the Survivor production.
and you'll get to see more of Fiji next week. I bet they run the final immunity challenge on top of that mountain. I feel like they always do the last challenge in that spot that overlooks the entire water. It's a very epic location, but it kind of loses its effect when you've seen different challenges in the same spot for now 7 seasons in a row.
Yeah. Yeah, that will be, because that's the Final Four challenge was that, like, throw the ball up the ramp and do the thing while it's coming down in 46, right?
Yeah, that was a good challenge. I like that for the final immunity. So the bar's a little bit higher for the final challenge. If it's a puzzle and an obstacle course, I don't know what we're doing here for the last challenge.
Fingers crossed. Thanks for listening. Tune in next week for our recap of the season, but enjoy the finale, and we'll talk to you then.